She told her girls to keep their heads down in rooms like this. But the moment Chong looked up from his deal, and those two pairs of eyes stared straight back at him, Sandra knew. Trouble had just found her by name. Sandra Reeves had exactly $11, a check engine light she'd been ignoring for 3 weeks, and 2 7-year-olds who ate like grown men. She sat in the parking lot of Jeong's and did not move. The building stared back at her. Brushed steel, floor-to-ceiling glass, the kind of quiet that money buys deliberately. 2 valets stood at the entrance in matching black. A restaurant that didn't put its prices on the website because if you needed to ask, you couldn't afford it. She'd gotten the job through a connection she'd had to beg for. She did not beg easily. Mama. Mia's voice from the back seat. Quiet, watchful, always watching. Your hands are shaking. Sandra looked down. They were. She pressed them flat against her thighs. No, they're not. Okay, Mia said. She didn't argue. She never argued. She just saw things and filed them away somewhere behind those careful eyes. Zoe was already unbuckling. Can we eat there? The food smells expensive. You can't smell a building, Zoe. I can. Sandra turned around and looked at both of them. These two impossible creatures she'd built a whole life around. You sit in the back. You do homework. You do not speak to anyone. You do not wander. You do not... Breathe, Zoe offered. Don't push me today. Sandra said it soft. Zoe heard the underneath of it and sat back. 3 floors up, a man named Chong was deciding whether someone lived or died. Not dramatically, bureaucratically. That was the part nobody understood about power. It wasn't loud. It was paperwork and silence and a single nod that meant handle it. He sat at the head of a table that cost more than most cars. 4 men around him, none of them breathing comfortably. Quan, his lieutenant, sharp-faced and loyal in the way that dogs are loyal, which is to say conditionally, slid a folder across the table. Chong didn't open it. The Busan debt, he said flatly. How old? 90 days. And the man responsible? Silence. Is he sorry? Chong said. Or is he just afraid? More silence, which was its own answer. Chong finally opened the folder, looked at it for 3 seconds, closed it. Afraid doesn't interest me. He stood, buttoned his jacket. Handle it. He walked toward the elevator without another word. 41 years old. The kind of man that rooms rearrange themselves around. Not because of size, though he was built like controlled violence, but because of the absolute absence of uncertainty in him. He hadn't been uncertain about anything in 8 years. The elevator doors opened. Somewhere below, a woman was walking through the staff entrance, trying to stop her hands from shaking. Have you ever walked into something knowing it was bigger than you, but went in anyway because you had no other choice? Drop it in the comments. The first hour was fine. Sandra learned the floor layout, memorized the table numbers, kept her head down, and her movements efficient. Hyun, the floor manager, was nervous in the permanent way of someone who'd been nervous so long he'd forgotten what calm felt like. He showed her everything twice. The girls were in the back. Quiet. Good. She was carrying a water pitcher to table 7 when she heard the elevator. The kitchen went still. Actually still, a chef mid-chop just stopped. A busboy froze with a rack of glasses halfway to the shelf. Sandra turned. Chong stepped off the elevator and the room rearranged itself around him. She understood immediately what he was. Not from the suit. Not from the way men straightened when he entered. From his eyes, flat and measuring and entirely without performance. She looked away. Not your business. Invisible, stay invisible. She turned back toward table 7. That's when she heard Zoe. Oh, hi. Sandra spun. Zoe was standing in the middle of the dining floor. Homework abandoned, curiosity fully operational. Staring directly at Chong from approximately 4 feet away. Mia stood beside her. She hadn't wandered. She'd followed her sister, which was different. Both of them, right there, staring. Chong stopped walking. The moment lasted maybe 5 seconds, but 5 seconds was enough. Because something happened in Chong's face that Sandra had no framework for. It wasn't annoyance, wasn't dismissal. It was something that moved through him like a tremor through bedrock. Something that had no business being on the face of a man like that. Recognition. Not of Sandra. Not of the girl specifically. Something deeper, something cellular. Sandra crossed the floor in 8 steps and put both hands on her daughter's shoulders. I'm so sorry. They won't be on the floor again. It won't happen. What are your names? His voice was low, not a performance, not charming, just direct. Zoe answered before Sandra could stop her. Zoe, she's Mia. We're twins, but we're not the same. Chong looked at Mia. Mia looked back at him with those still, ancient eyes. Something in Chong's jaw tightened like a wire pulled taut. I can see that, he said quietly. Sandra pulled the girls back. Come on. Your first day? He was looking at Sandra now. Yes? How do you find it? She met his eyes evenly. Fine, thank you. Back off. He heard the underneath. She knew he did. He nodded once and continued walking. But Sandra stood there a moment longer than she should have, and because she'd seen what crossed his face when he looked at her daughters. And it made absolutely no sense. And that made it worse. You walked out there on purpose, Sandra said. She was crouched in the back room, eye level with Zoe, voice completely controlled. I was bored, Zoe said. You were bored. The homework was too easy. Zoe Marie Reeves. Zoe's chin went up. He wasn't scary. That's not the point. He looked at us like he missed us, Mia said from the corner. Both Sandra and Zoe turned. Mia was sitting with her book open, not reading it. She said things like that, quiet, precise things that landed like stones dropped in still water. He doesn't know you, Sandra said carefully. I know. Mia looked up. That's what was weird about it. Sandra held her daughter's gaze for a moment too long. Then she stood. Neither of you move from this room again. That's not a negotiation. Upstairs, Chong stood at his office window and told himself to stop. He was good at that. Discipline was the only religion he'd ever practiced consistently. The ability to look at something that wanted to hurt him and simply choose not to engage. 8 years of it. But those eyes, Mia's specifically, that stillness, that quiet way of absorbing everything without reacting. He'd only ever seen that quality in one other face. A face he kept in a photograph locked in a safe because he couldn't throw it away and couldn't look at it regularly without something in his chest becoming unbearable. Stop. His daughter had died before she could become anyone. 3 months old, he'd held her 7 times. After the funeral, he'd gone back to work inside 48 hours because stopping meant feeling and feeling meant stop. Chong Si. Kwon in the doorway. The Busan situation is resolved. Good. And the new waitress? Chong turned. Kwon read the room immediately. Should I find out who she is? Chong was quiet for a long moment. Find out who the father is, he said finally. The girl's father. Kwon blinked once, carefully. Any reason? Chong turned back to the window. Those children have park eyes, he said quietly. And I want to know why. That's the collision. Sandra is sharp, guarded, and already unsettled. Chong is dangerous, cracked open by something he can't explain. The twins are grenades with gap-toothed smiles. Now it gets ugly before it gets real. The storm came in fast and mean. By 8 o'clock, the back parking lot was underwater, and the power to the staff exit had been dead for 40 minutes. Sandra's car sat in 6 inches of standing water, completely useless. The check engine light presumably still blinking under the surface like a final insult. She stood under the kitchen awning with both girls pressed into her sides and did the math in her head. Rideshare. 47 minutes, $62 she didn't have. Bus stopped running at 8:15. Walking 2 miles. Pouring rain, 2 7-year-olds. None of these are options. Hyun appeared at the door looking like a man delivering bad news to someone who was already having a bad day. Mr. Chong says you can wait in the private lounge. His driver will take you home when the rain clears. Sandra didn't move. Tell him thank you. We're fine out here. Hyun's face did something complicated. Sandra see. It was not framed as an offer. She looked at him. He looked back apologetically. She looked at her daughters, soaking, shivering, Zoe's braid dripping, Mia standing in a puddle with the quiet resignation of someone used to things not going right. Sandra's jaw tightened. Fine. The private lounge was the kind of room that made Sandra aware of every thread count difference between her uniform and the furniture. Chong was at the far table, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, documents spread in front of him. He looked up when they entered, stood, which she hadn't expected, then gestured toward the seating area and looked back down at his work. No performance, no power play, just sit. Sandra sat, pulled both girls close, kept her eyes on the wall. Zoe lasted 31 seconds. She climbed down, walked directly to Chong's table and planted herself across from him with her arms crossed like she had an appointment. What are all those papers? Sandra pressed 2 fingers to her temple. Zoe. She can ask. Chong didn't look up. They're important papers, Zoe said, studying them. Are they about crime? The room went very still. Chong looked up slowly. Zoe stared back at him, completely unbothered. Zoe! Sandra's voice was a blade. Come sit down. I'm just asking. Now. Zoe retreated, but kept her eyes on Chong the whole way back, suspicious and fascinated simultaneously. Mia had been watching from the couch. She hadn't moved. She spoke now, quietly, without looking up from her book. She doesn't mean to be rude. She just doesn't have a filter yet. Yet, Chong repeated. Mama says she'll grow into one. I'm not sure she will. Sandra looked at her daughter. Mia turned a page. Chong made a sound. Low, involuntary. Not quite a laugh. Something that had forgotten how to be a laugh and was attempting to remember. Sandra looked at him sharply. He was looking at Mia with that expression again. The one that had no business on his face. Raw and unguarded and quickly suppressed. Your daughters are, he started. I know what they are? Sandra cut him off clean. Thank you for the room. Don't, whatever you're building toward. Don't. Chong held her gaze. Sandra held his right back. Neither of them looked away for a beat too long. Then Chong looked back at his papers. And Sandra spent the next 40 minutes staring at the wall, acutely aware that she could feel him in the room, the way you feel weather changing. She hated that. Kwan put the folder on Chong's desk at 11:15. Chong opened it. Sandra Reeves, 31, Savannah, Georgia, relocated to Atlanta 4 years ago. A single mother, no criminal record, no active warrants. Father listed on birth certificates. Chong stopped reading. He read the name again. Park Jin-ho. The folder made a sound hitting the desk. Sharp, involuntary. Chong's hand had moved before his brain authorized it. He stood up, sat back down. Park Jin-ho, his cousin, 8 years gone. The last conversation they'd had was not a conversation. It was Chong laying out, in very precise terms, what happened to men who stole from him, regardless of blood. Jin-ho had stood there and taken it, and then 3 days later he was simply gone. Chong had assumed shame, had assumed distance, had eventually stopped assuming anything and filed it under over. He had not assumed this. He pulled the birth certificate copy from the folder. The girls were 7 years old. Jinho had vanished 8 years ago. The math sat in his chest like a stone in still water, sinking slow, leaving rings. Jinho had left Atlanta knowing Sandra was pregnant. Had left her, had left them. 2 daughters with park eyes and his grandmother's stubborn jaw, and not a single piece of their father's name to carry. Chong sat in his office until 2 in the morning. He showed up at her apartment at 7:45. No call, no warning, no jacket, 2 coffees. Sandra opened the door and stared at him the way you stare at something that shouldn't be in front of you. How do you know where I live? Not a question. An indictment. I need to tell you something. You need to leave. Sandra, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to leave this doorway right now. Jinho was my cousin. The door stopped moving. Sandra stood completely still. The coffee cups trembled slightly in Chong's hands, and Sandra's eyes went directly to that tremor because it was the most human thing she'd seen from him, and it terrified her more than his stillness had. He never told me about you, Chong said. His voice was stripped of everything except the words themselves. He never told me there were children. He disappeared and I let him go and I never... He stopped. His throat worked. I had a daughter. She died 3 months old, and I've spent 8 years with that. He pressed his mouth together. And then I looked up in my restaurant and saw 2 little girls with park eyes and His voice locked. Sandra stared at this man, this dangerous, powerful, a terrifying man, standing in her hallway, coming completely apart at the seams with 2 cups of coffee and nowhere to put any of it. Every instinct she had said close the door. She stepped back and opened it wider instead. She didn't say, come in. She didn't have to. Have you ever had someone show up and hand you a truth that rewrote everything you thought you understood? What did you do? Tell us in the comments. She put coffee in front of him like he was anyone. He sat at her kitchen table, then this man who had entire floors of a restaurant that cost more than her building, and wrapped both hands around a chipped mug with a cartoon sun on it and stared at the table. Sandra sat across from him, arms folded, watching. He told me he loved me, she said finally. No preamble. Jinho. Said it like he meant it. I believed him because... She stopped. Because I wanted to. And then one morning he was gone. No note, no call, just absence where a person used to be. She paused. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks later. Chong was quiet. I want you to understand something. Her voice was even, precise. I did not fall apart. I did not wait for him. I packed everything I owned into a car that was older than some of my clothes, and I drove to Atlanta and I built something, by myself, with my hands and my back and my 2 feet. I know. I'm not finished. She looked at him directly. My daughters do not know what it feels like to lack anything that matters. They are loved completely. They are whole. Whatever Jinho took when he left, I made sure they never felt the shape of it. Chong looked at her for a long moment. He didn't deserve you, he said quietly. No, Sandra agreed. He didn't. Silence settled, the kind with weight. Tell me about her, Sandra said. Your daughter. Chong looked up, unprepared for that. You don't have to... Yuna. He said it like he was testing whether the word still worked. Her name was Yuna. She had her mother's mouth and... He stopped, started again. She had this way of looking at you, completely still, like she was deciding something important about you. His voice dropped. Mia does that? Sandra said nothing. I held her 7 times, Chong said. I counted because I knew I wasn't going to get more chances and I wanted to... He stopped again. His jaw tightened. I wanted to remember the weight of her in case I forgot. The kitchen was very quiet. Did you? Sandra asked softly. Forget? Chong looked at the cartoon sun on his mug. Every day I wake up terrified that I have, he said. And every day I haven't. And I don't know if that's a gift or a punishment anymore. Sandra unfolded her arms. It was a small movement, almost nothing. But Chong noticed, and Sandra knew he noticed, and neither of them said anything about it. From the hallway came the sound of Zoe laughing at cartoons, explosive, full body, completely unself-conscious. The laugh of someone who had never had a reason to make herself smaller. Chong's entire face changed. Just for a moment, just long enough. Sandra watched it happen. Watched this man who controlled rooms and made people afraid get completely undone by the sound of a child laughing in a hallway. She looked away before he could catch her looking. Too much, she told herself. Way too much. But the wall she'd spent 4 years building had developed a crack she couldn't locate the source of, and that was the most dangerous thing that had happened to her in a very long time. Sandra is cracking. Chong is bleeding. The twins are doing what they do, existing so precisely that nobody around them can pretend anymore. Now everything that was built gets destroyed before it gets saved. It was 4 weeks of something Sandra refused to name. Chong came every other morning, sometimes with food, sometimes with nothing, just himself, sitting at her kitchen table while the girls did homework, and Zoe interrogated him about everything, and Mia watched him with those eyes that saw too much. Sandra watched too, from a careful distance. Oh, she watched him teach Mia to fold a napkin into a crane with the focused patience of a man who had never been patient about anything. Watched him let Zoe beat him at cards 3 times in a row and pretend he hadn't let her. Watched him stand at her kitchen window with his coffee going cold, staring at nothing, and recognized the look because she'd worn it herself. The look of someone slowly remembering they were still alive. She didn't name it, but she stopped folding her arms when he walked in. The photograph arrived on a Thursday. Sandra was walking the girls to school. Zoe mid-sentence about something, Mia 2 steps ahead like always, when a black car she didn't recognize slowed beside them. The window dropped. A man, 40s, eyes like closed doors. "Enjoying the mornings?" he said pleasantly. Sandra put both hands on her daughter's shoulders. The man held up his phone. The screen showed a photograph. Sandra's apartment building, taken from street level. The girls visible through the window doing homework, completely unaware. Taken recently. The homework on the table was last Tuesday's. "Tell Chong," the man said, still pleasant, "that his personal life has become professionally inconvenient." The window went up. The car moved on. Sandra stood on the pavement for a full 10 seconds. Her hands were on her daughter's and she did not move them. "Mama?" Mia's voice, quiet, careful. "Keep walking," Sandra said. "Don't stop." She called Chong twice before he picked up. "Someone just showed me a photograph of my daughters through my apartment window," she said. Her voice was completely flat, but the kind of flat that lives on the other side of panic. "Through my window, Chong, while they were doing homework. Someone was outside my building watching my children." She heard him go absolutely still on the other end. "Where are you right now?" "Don't." Her voice cracked open, just once, then sealed back shut. "Don't do the protective thing. Don't send men. Don't handle it. Just tell me honestly, is this because of you?" Silence. "Is this because of you?" "Yes." Sandra closed her eyes. "I knew." Her voice dropped to something raw and quiet and terrible. "I knew exactly what you were. I watched you sit at my table and I watched my girls fall in love with you, And I let it happen anyway because I wanted... She stopped, pressed her hand over her mouth, pulled it back. It doesn't matter what I wanted. My daughters are in a photograph taken through their bedroom window, and that is the only thing that matters right now. Let me fix it. You can't fix it. Her voice broke fully this time. Not crying, something harder than crying. This is not a broken thing you can fix. This is your life. This is what your life does to the people standing next to you, and I have 2 children who cannot... She stopped, breathing. We're done. Whatever this was, it's done. Sandra... She hung up, stood on the pavement outside St. Mary's Elementary, pressed both palms flat against her thighs. There it is, she told herself. There's why you don't do this. She walked inside to get her daughters and did not look back. Chong found Kwon by noon. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. How he sat across from his lieutenant in a room with no windows and spoke very quietly for 4 minutes, and watched Kwon's face change color progressively. You contacted the CO faction, Chong said. You gave them her name. Kwon's jaw worked. I was protecting the operation. You put children in a photograph. She was a liability. She was none of your business. Chong's voice stayed flat. She was never your business. And the moment you made her your business, you ended yours. Kwon started to speak. Everything, Chong said quietly. Every account, every contact, every arrangement I allowed you to build under my name. Gone. You leave Atlanta by tomorrow morning. You don't come back, ever. Chong-si, after everything I'm giving you your life. Chong stood. That's more than you gave 2 little girls who were doing homework. Kwon left. Chong sat in his office until midnight. The city moved below him, indifferent, continuous, unbothered by the specific grief of specific people. He pulled the photograph from his safe. Yuna, 3 months old, eyes open, that stillness. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at his phone. Sandra's name on the screen. He typed, I handled it, you're safe. He stared at it, deleted it, typed, I'm sorry, stared at it, deleted it, put the phone down, picked it up. The truth is, I have been empty for 8 years, and your daughters looked at me, and I remembered what it felt like to be a person. And I don't know how to go back to not knowing that. He stared at that one the longest, deleted it, put the phone face down, stood at the window. He thought about the napkin crane he taught Mia to fold. How she'd done it perfectly on the 3rd attempt, and looked up at him with those eyes that saw everything and said simply, again. Not thank you, not wow, just again, like she trusted he'd still be there to show her. He thought about the weight of 7. He thought about Sandra unfolding her arms. He picked up his jacket. He didn't call ahead. Sandra was sitting in the dark when the knock came. Not sleeping, just sitting. The girls were in bed. Zoe had cried at dinner for reasons she wouldn't specify, which meant she knew exactly why she was crying and wasn't ready to say it. Mia had eaten half her food, quietly and without complaint, and that was worse. Sandra had sat at the kitchen table after and looked at the chair Chong usually took. She'd looked at it for a long time. The knock was quiet, 3 times, like he wasn't sure he had the right. She didn't move. It came again, twice, then nothing. She was on her feet before she'd made a decision. She got to the door, put her hand on the knob, stood there. Every reason. You know every reason. From behind her, Mia's voice, small and sleep-rough from the hallway. Mama. Sandra turned. Mia stood in her pajamas, hair loose, eyes clear in the way they always were. Awake in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. You're going to regret it, Mia said quietly. If you don't open it. 7 years old. Sandra looked at her daughter. At those eyes. at the thing in them that was older than 7 and had always been older than 7 and probably always would be. She turned back to the door, opened it. He looked wrecked. Not physically. Chong would probably look composed at the end of the world. It was structural, built into him. But in the eyes, the careful blankness was completely gone. What was underneath it was not comfortable to look at. He didn't have coffee this time, nothing in his hands at all. Just himself standing in her doorway at midnight, stripped of every layer he'd spent 8 years constructing. "I ended it," he said. "Kwan is gone. The faction that approached him has been managed. I had your building swept 3 hours ago. You're clean. The girls are safe." Sandra leaned against the door frame. "That's not why you're here." "No." He exhaled. "It's not." He reached into his jacket, held out the photograph. Yuna, 3 months old. Sandra took it slowly, looked at it in the low light of the hallway. The resemblance to Mia was not a suggestion. Same brow, same quality of stillness in the eyes, same expression that said, "I am watching you and I have already decided." "Her name was Yuna," Chong said. "She lived 93 days. I held her 7 times. I counted them because..." His voice fractured clean across the middle. He stopped. Rebuilt. "Because I knew I wasn't getting more and I needed something to hold on to afterward." Sandra looked up from the photograph. "After she died," he continued, I went back to work in 48 hours. I told myself that was strength. I built everything bigger, harder, more controlled. I made myself into something that didn't need anything." He paused. "I was very good at it." "I know," Sandra said quietly. I could tell. And then your daughters looked at me." His voice dropped to something barely above a breath. "And every single thing I'd built to stay empty just stopped working." The hallway held the silence between them. "I'm not Jin-ho." He said it simply. No defense in it, just fact. "I know his blood is half of what makes them. I know you have no reason to separate me from what he did. I know my world has already reached your doorstep once, and that is once more than it ever should have." He met her eyes fully. "But I am standing here because the alternative is going back to that office and being very, very good at being nothing. And I can't..." His voice broke again. Let it break this time, didn't try to stop it. "I can't make myself want that anymore." Sandra was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that isn't empty. Zoe cried at dinner tonight," she said finally. "Wouldn't tell me why, but she kept looking at your chair." Chong's eyes closed briefly. "Mia ate half her food." Sandra's voice was steady and devastating simultaneously. "Didn't complain, didn't explain. Just half her food, and then she cleared her plate and went to do her homework." Sandra paused. She's 7 years old and she already knows how to grieve quietly. How to just absorb an absence and keep moving. She watched that land on him. Watched him take the full weight of it. "I've been so afraid," Sandra said. Quieter now. More honest than she'd intended. "Not of you specifically. Of this. Of letting something in that could leave. Of my girls looking at a door waiting for someone who decided they weren't worth staying for." Her voice dropped. "They've never had that experience. I made sure. And the fact that they're already grieving you after 4 weeks means I miscalculated somewhere." "Sandra, I'm not finished." She looked at him directly. "I need you to understand what you're standing at the edge of. This isn't casual. This isn't simple. These are 2 children who will love you with everything they have if you let them. And I am a woman who has rebuilt herself from nothing once and does not have the bandwidth to do it again." She paused. "So if you're here because you're lonely, or because we're interesting, or because this feels different than your regular life, turn around, walk away. I mean that with everything in me." Chong held her gaze. And if I'm here, he said quietly, because I haven't felt like a human being in 8 years and your family did something to me I don't have language for yet. And because I am willing to burn down every dangerous thing in my world to build something that deserves to be near yours. He stopped. Then what? Sandra looked at this man. This dangerous, broken, trying to be brave, completely unguarded man standing in her doorway at midnight with his dead daughter's photograph and his whole chest cracked open. She thought about $11 in a check engine light. She thought about 4 years of doing everything alone. She thought about arms folded and walls built and the very deliberate architecture of not needing. She thought about Mia saying you're going to regret it. She stepped back, opened the door wider. He stepped inside. Zoe appeared from the hallway in approximately 4 seconds. Sandra was convinced she'd been awake the entire time, stationed, waiting, and hit Chong somewhere around the ribcage at full speed. He caught her, both arms, automatic, like muscle memory for something he'd never actually done. Mia came and stood beside Sandra, took her hand. They watched Chong stand in the living room holding Zoe, who was already talking about the crying at dinner, about the homework, about how she'd known he'd come back because Mama only cleans the kitchen twice when she's sad about something real. Chong looked at Sandra over Zoe's shoulder. Sandra looked back. "She's not wrong," Sandra said quietly. The kitchen was very clean. Something broke open in Chong's face. Fully, finally, without apology. Not quite a smile. Something older and more honest than a smile. Something that had been buried under 8 years of discipline and grief and the practiced art of needing nothing. Mia squeezed Sandra's hand once. Sandra squeezed back. 6 months later, Chong's name appeared on the lease of a small restaurant in Midtown. No private floors, no back rooms, no men standing at elevators, just food and light, and a table by the window permanently set for 4. Mia did homework there every evening with the focused intensity of someone going somewhere. Zoe corrected Chong's Korean pronunciation so aggressively that the kitchen staff started taking bets on how long before he got it right. He never fully got it right. He suspected she was doing it on purpose. He didn't mind. And Sandra, yes, who had driven to Atlanta with nothing but 2 babies and the specific stubbornness of a woman who refused to be defeated, would sometimes look up from her coffee and find Chong watching her with an expression she had no word for. She'd stopped needing one. Some things didn't require language, some things just required showing up. At midnight, without coffee, and letting the door open. Some people don't arrive in your life gently. They arrive at midnight, wrecked and honest, asking for one more chance. Would you open the door? Tell us in the comments, because the real love stories happen in the comments section too.